down on this idea of Princess Nancy, quote unquote. Their tweet, the answer to health care, H.R. 3000, the bill killed by, quote, Princess Nancy, unquote, in committee. So, Carl, the Cain campaign clearly confident enough to send a little tweak there to Nancy Pelosi, even though they're facing this scandal about sexual harassment across the country that's dominated so much of his campaign's attention in recent days, Carl.
Yep, Herman Cain did tell us a few moments ago he probably shouldn't have used that term, but that hasn't stopped a bunch of Twitter profiles, including Princess Pelosi, from popping up on Twitter. Thanks, Eamon. One quick live look at the scene here at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. As you can see, people mostly done filing out of the arena tonight. Want to go back to Larry Kudlow at CNBC headquarters with a special guest. Larry?
All right, thanks very much, Carl. We do have a very special guest, an economist who has advised 3 presidents. Larry Lindsay is former National Economic Council Director for President George W. Bush, a former Federal Reserve governor, and now president and CEO of the Lindsay Group. Larry, I myself was quite unhappy with the candidates' response to the banking crisis going on worldwide, but particularly in Europe after a bad day today. And I want to just play a tape. This is what Governor Romney said about it.
There will be some who say here that banks in the U.S. that have Italian debt, that we ought to help those as well. My view is no, no, no. We do not need to step in to bail out banks either in Europe or banks here in the U.S. that may have Italian debt.
Larry, as a former Federal Reserve governor, in addition to your other posts, don't we, the United States, need a strategy to deal with potential worst-case scenarios that might come out of Italy and Europe? The White House doesn't seem to have one, and I didn't hear one tonight. What's your take?
Yeah, the White House didn't have one, and they have the time to put one together. Tonight it was pretty hard to come up with one in a 30-second or 60-second soundbite. But I agree with you. I think we only had 2 candidates who asked about it, Romney and Cain. I didn't think either one.
Both financial people, both business and financial people.
Right. I wish we'd pushed it more on the other candidates as well.
Let me just ask, what your own opinion, what sort of, we don't have the time to go through the white paper, we should, but what would you suggest that we'd be thinking about right now in the light of what happened today and, of course, the Italian crisis?
Well, first of all, I think the candidates were right. This is first and foremost a European problem. The Europeans have the money and they have to sort it out. But we do have to watch for the possibility of contagion. And our banks are exposed. I'm sure the Fed is on top of that. I have a lot of faith in them to be able both to regulate the banks and to limit damage and to inject liquidity. And that's really our first line of defense. I hope we don't turn this into a foreign policy crisis or into some political grandstanding campaign. That would be a serious
Or just blame Europe.
Or just blame Europe, which is, a pretty popular thing to do in Washington right now.
And I heard a little bit of that tonight.
Absolutely. It's, it's something you can be bipartisan about, right?
Yes, all right. Everybody hates Europe. I don't hate Europe. Let me go to tax policy. Among your many skill sets, you are a tax expert, having written The Growth Experiment about the Reagan tax cuts many years ago. They have no disagreements on the stage tonight. Mitt Romney does not have a tax reform. Newt Gingrich has a 15% optional flat tax. Rick Perry has a 20% optional flat tax. Huntsman has a 3-tiered flattening of tax rates, getting rid of deductions. First of all, who's on the right track? Who's got the right plan?
Well, I think that you really saw 2 groups. One was what I would call the creative crowd, which came up with detailed answers, new ideas, and I would call that everyone but Romney. Romney's the play safe candidate, and he has 59 points, but I think Maria caught him on that one. Each one of those 59 points is like less than 1/59th of what actually needs to be done. It doesn't add up to a lot, and I think he's got to work on that. But it's fine for playing safe. I think on the creative side, 999 is catchy. It works. It's very popular. I think Cain keeps coming back to it because it's important to stress. I thought Bachmann's answers on taxes showed she's a very knowledgeable person, former tax lawyer.
Cain was so on message with 999. Whether one agrees or disagrees with that point of view, he was so totally on message. It's like he was liberated from what's gone on in the past week. Larry Lindsay, I'm sorry we don't have more time. Thank you, as always. Now I'm going to go back to Carl Quintanilla. Carl, turn it over to you.
Nicely put, Larry. Thanks. Scott Cohn and his team have been spending all night working the facts, keeping the candidates honest with their CNBC fact finders. Scott?
And we thought we might be busy, Carl, and indeed we have been. There's been a lot to go through. All the candidates are running against the Obama economy, and sometimes they do get a little overzealous. Here's Mitt Romney on median incomes during the Obama years.
Median incomes have dropped 10% in the last 3 years. At the same time, gasoline prices are up, food prices are up, health care costs are up. And so what I want to do is help the people who've been hurt the most, and that's the middle class.
Incomes are down, but they're not down 10%. That's really 4% since the president took office, according to the Census Bureau. 10% refers to median income since 2007. Romney also referred to the stimulus that failed, the subject of plenty of debate from here on out, no doubt. Worth noting, the Congressional Budget Office says the stimulus created at least 1.4 million jobs, at least. Michele Bachmann spun some impressive statistics on U.S. tax rates compared to the rest of the world. Listen.
But if you look today in the United States, we have an effective rate, if you average in state taxes with federal taxes, of about 40%. But the world took a clue, because capital is mobile, and capital went to places where corporate tax rates went to 25% and falling. We're still stuck in a 1986 era of about a 40% tax rate.
Okay, she is basically right, according to figures from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Congressional Research Service. But digging a little further, that same report says Japan and France have roughly similar rates. Germany not far behind. It's the others, when you lump them in, that you get the 25%. And a U.S. rate cut, the report says, would likely spark similar rate cuts abroad. Newt Gingrich talked about housing and banks cleaning up on foreclosures.
Today, the banks are actually profiting more by foreclosing than by encouraging short sales.
Well, we found a study by Amherst Securities saying that no, banks actually lose on average 45% in a foreclosure compared to 35% in a short sale. They don't profit from either one. Speaking of profits, Newt Gingrich was asked about what he did for the $300,000 that he got from Freddie Mac a few years ago. He said that what he did was that he gave advice that they didn't follow. Well, we can't know what advice the speaker gave Freddie Mac back in 2006, but we do know, according to the AP, that at the time, Freddie was hiring an army of former politicians, mostly conservatives, to push back against proposed new regulations on Capitol Hill. So there's a little bit of nuance there as you separate fact from fiction and everything in between. Carl, back to you.
That's what we're after. Good stuff, Scott. Thank you for that. Scott Cohn back at headquarters. When we come back, some former White House insiders weigh in on what they heard tonight and talk some strategy for where the campaigns need to go from here. We continue to break down tonight's CNBC Republican presidential debate, which happened on that very stage earlier tonight. Larry Kudlow's back at headquarters. Larry?
All right, thank you, Carl. So, Democrats were undoubtedly watching our debate, and here to represent the Democratic National Committee, we welcome former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland. Governor, good evening. Thank you for this, by the way. Okay, so there was obviously a lot of partisanship, a lot of attacks on President Obama, taxes, class warfare, health care. Let me give you the first response.
Well, I think President Obama won this debate tonight. I think he should feel pretty good, because I don't think a single person on that platform is capable of standing with him, debating the issues facing the American people, and doing so in a way that will enable them to be elected president. I just don't think it's possible.
All right. In substantive policy terms, okay, where do you think the GOP was weakest tonight?
I heard nothing about real people tonight. I heard almost nothing about the plight of the unemployed, people who are struggling with housing. Now, that issue was, in fact, discussed. But they seem to worship at the altar of tax cuts and the free market, and they seem devoid of understanding what's really happening to real people as we struggle through trying to come out of this recession.
But do you think there's any revolt going on regarding excessive governmental intervention? Obviously, that includes spending and borrowing. But in particular, let's take housing. It's a great point. Okay. You had a lot of free market talk. Let the market clear. That'll solve housing. I know you disagree. The president wants more interference. He wants to modify all manner of mortgages. Why do you think people will side with the president on this?
Well, because real people are struggling out there. People are underwater with their mortgages. People are unable to pay their mortgages, and it's a crisis.
But we spend tens of billions. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just saying the administration has spent, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 billion dollars to modify mortgages. Nothing much seems to work. You do have a spending revolt. Are the Republicans drawing blood on this issue?
Well, I don't think so. And, you know, the auto industry was discussed tonight as well. And here is Governor Romney from Michigan. You would think he would understand the importance of maintaining a viable American automobile industry. You know, Larry, during the auto crisis, Honda came to me. Honda is not a unionized company, but they produce a lot of cars in Ohio. And they called me, some of the officials called me on a Sunday afternoon, and they asked if they could come and see me. And so we sat around the governor's residence dining room table. And they said to me, you know, we're not usually advocating for our competitors, but Governor, do what you can to try to get some help. Because
in Ohio, right?
Because 80% or more of our suppliers also supply the big three. And their margins are very thin, and we are afraid this supply chain is going to collapse. I think a lot of people who look at what was done with the auto industry, for example, look at it in very narrow terms, and they don't understand the range of jobs and companies and activities that were at risk.
Okay.
And so I think government intervention is appropriate at times, and I know it's a philosophical difference of opinion.
Well, it just interests me. We're going to have to leave it there, and I appreciate your defense. The question is there a public revolt against too much government intervention? We will love to have you back on the Cutler Report so we can discuss this another time. We appreciate Governor Strickland very, very much. I'm going to toss it back, I think, to Carl Quintanilla.
All right, Larry, thank you very much. Our next guests both predicted earlier that jobs would be the defining issue of the debate. So which candidates tackled the topic best and who fell short? Joining us from CNBC Global Headquarters as well tonight, Gary Shapiro is the CEO of Consumer Electronics Association. And Leo Hendry, of course, joins us. He's managing partner of Intermedia Partners, also served as an economic and trade advisor to President Obama during his campaign. Guys, good to see both of you. Leo, can you, as an ardent Democrat, can you give props to at least one of the candidates that was on stage tonight?
You know, I think all of them, Carl, failed to, as Governor Strickland just mentioned to Larry, I think all of them sort of brushed aside the magnitude of this jobs crisis. It's enormous, Carl, as you follow so closely every day. There seemed to be, as the governor suggested as well, an insensitivity to long-term unemployment. I did see some nice mentions about manufacturing from Senator Santorum. I thought he alone among the 8 saw the imperative of sort of a manufacturing resuscitation. But the agenda that all of these candidates advance today is not going to create any jobs of moment. Had they acknowledged, Carl, I'm sorry, going in, had they acknowledged the magnitude of the problem, I think they would have been more sanguine about a dual solution here, one that comes equally from the private sector and government. If we, in fact, as I know we do, have 29 million women and men in real terms who are unemployed, we all have a role to play. And this deregulation, anti-regulation, anti-government, do it all through the tax side and the cutting side is not going to fix this problem, Carl.
Gary, though, it was a Republican debate, and a lot of the things that Leo's criticizing, criticism of the Fed, criticism of bailouts, the idea that housing needs to basically self-cure, got big applause in this room tonight.
Well, Carl, I think it was a great debate because it was substantive, it focused on the economy, and it focused on real issues and real solutions. Look, it's not working now under the present administration. Business confidence is low. They don't know what the future is told. They're told that they're greedy, that their taxes are going to be raised. They just don't know what to do. There's all sorts of tax laws and rules and requirements which are sending our jobs overseas, and they are providing different solutions, all of them. I think every one of them, in a sense, brought something to the table, and they were in agreement with each other. I think the Republicans showed greater unity tonight and a sense of purpose and resolve, and would be focused on solving our nation's problems and creating jobs, and we haven't seen in 3 years.
Well, because their policies are different only in various shades, right? There wasn't a lot of crossfire on the stage itself. So how do we know who won, if anyone did, Gary?
Well, I think actually some people did great. I think Mitt Romney did a terrific job. I think Bachmann shows she knows tax law, and she is substantive. She's been undersold. And I think the rest of them had good ideas. I think, Ron Paul is growing on people. People are listening to his ideas. He was right before, and he's probably right again. So I think we have some good candidates out there, and I think business people are listening to these candidates, and they're saying, yes, they understand what it takes to create a job. It's risking capital.